And welcome to our first episode of Spotlight at Northern for the spring semester 2018. Things have changed. I've grown a beard. Ken Blanchard is still short, so I guess that's not a change. I'm John Schaff, Professor of Political Science at Northern State University. He is still Ken Blanchard, Professor of Political Science, Northern State University. What we thought we'd do today, we're going to do another episode where it's just Ken and me shooting the bull about the things we like to shoot the bull about, namely American politics. And I have on my list here of things to talk about. The big thing is Trump. That will not surprise anybody. But as we sit here, what's the date today? Are we on the 31st of January?
It's the 31st.
As we record this, which means Donald Trump has been in office just a tick over 1 year. I don't know if you want to put a letter grade on it, but how would you assess the first Trumpian year?
I would have to say that you could use lots of different standards and come up with different grades. If there's a grade for aesthetic appearance, the swimsuit, version of this model, it's been pretty abysmal. There's been a lot of ugly stuff, and certainly the president's tweeting, his off-colored remarks at various times, his affirming a policy one day and then denouncing it the next day. If you look at that, the aesthetics of the presidency, it's not a very pretty picture. If you look at the content, what has he got accomplished? Compares with some of the better presidencies. I mean, the tax bill was the big thing, but he got it through. Whether it's going to turn out to help the Republicans or not, without that, they would have had no achievement. And with that, they've got at least something to run on.
Yeah.
That makes a pretty good difference. In terms of foreign policy, I think it's been pretty good. Something like moving the capital recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which Congress did decades ago, and every president has kind of just ignored since then. And he just said, no, that's the capital. Israel's a country, gets to choose its own capital.
Yep.
That kind of common sense approach to some problems. And if he follows through, I think some of his other decisions on Mideast, on the Israeli-Palestinian problem, I think is pretty promising. In terms of policy, not bad, and in terms of judicial appointments, I think certainly for conservatives, very good.
Yep. And raw numbers, the number of appellate court judges in particular has been extraordinarily high. There's nothing like having the presidency and the Senate.
Yes.
As far as that goes, yeah, I don't know that my reaction is all dissimilar to yours. I think when I reflect back on the first year of the Trump presidency, it's almost a tale of two presidencies. Because you think about where we were a year ago when our national security advisor, actually it's really close, like within a day or two, was Mike Flynn, not for much longer if he was even around on the 31st of January. He didn't last long. Reince Priebus was chief of staff. Steve Bannon was the communications director, or whatever his actual job title was. And a lot of those people, a lot of the real Trumpsters, if you will, a lot of those got moved out. And by kind of, then you had the Scaramucci incident. What a wonderful 48 hours that was. When he was communications director, I believe that was his job title, was communications director. It was very evanescent, so it's hard to remember what his actual job title was. But then once basically John Kelly becomes chief of staff, I think you have a much more disciplined White House. Now that's relatively, because not all, but a lot of the pathologies that you're talking about are kind of front-loaded. When you think about, just under a year ago, you and I were here talking about the so-called travel ban. And while as I recall, neither you nor I had any principled objections to the policy, I think we both agreed that the creation, the implementation of the policy was a complete mess. And the White House appeared to be directionless. And when policy is based on Donald Trump's id, I don't think you're in a very good position. And so second half, you might say, starting in the fall up until now, we're at least approaching a more normalized presidency, I don't think it'll ever be normal. And so when we talk about presidential ratings, there's always, people do this in presidential studies. There's all these, you can go to various sources to, people will rank presidents from, what are we at now, 1 to 44. And there are two schools of thought on how do you assess a president. One is kind of a more objective, if you will. Did they accomplish things? Did they make a difference? And in that sense, you would say that, at least I would say the Trump administration is picking up some steam. Start out very slowly, very disorganized, and then is sort of kind of getting its mojo a little bit. Witnessed by last night's State of the Union address, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah.
On the other hand, another school of thought is you assess the actual content. Like, is it in the expert's judgment, was this a good thing or a bad thing? So you could say generically the tax bill, that's an accomplishment. There's one in Trump's favor. Or you could say it's an accomplishment, but it's a bad accomplishment. You can imagine all sorts of reasons why someone would say that. So it's bad. That's why I'd say, I think, if you would have asked me, well, people did at the end of the 100 days, where was Trump? And as I recall, I was on Canadian, of all things, Canadian television. I think I gave him a D+, C- is what I gave him at that point. If second half of the semester, if you will, if we're going to break it up in school language, I don't know, C+, B-, like it's you always feel like you're one tweet away from disaster with Donald Trump, whether it's Rocket Man in North Korea, or what does he call Chuck Schumer? He's not Lion Chuck, is he? Whatever he calls Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, so many of Trump's insults floating around, I can barely remember. Yeah, we're largely in agreement on, I think, the general judgment of the Trump administration so far. I would say a couple of things. One, first, 6 months of a presidency is often like this. I can remember as far back as Bill Clinton, when
that far back,
when the White House was crawling with people who were acting attorney general, acting this, acting that, without any appointments having been made, and folks who hadn't, folks were getting top secret briefings without any FBI clearance, and this was just, everybody thought, oh my goodness, this guy has no idea what he's doing. But it's just, the presidency is a hard job, and unfortunately, whatever system there might be for training a president, we don't have one. Mm-hmm. And they do tend to learn on the job, as well as much of their staff. The other thing I would say is, my dissertation subject, Machiavelli, once observed that when you see an intelligent person doing something stupid, you should be on guard, because a lot of times it's a trick. Now, there are times when I think Trump really is an idiot who just has been very lucky. And there are other times when I think he might be one of these Machiavellian geniuses, because one of the advantages of those tweets and giving us this image of somebody who can't control his mouth, who's a 14-year-old kid who suddenly became king, is he goes to Davos to speak to the World Economic Forum, and he shows that he can tie his shoes and doesn't trip over himself, and doesn't make a pass at the potted plant, and everybody thinks he's suddenly a hero for just doing those simplest of things. George W. Bush once said, that people tell me my English is bad. I didn't worry about it until Arnold Schwarzenegger started doing it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's that advantage. Ronald Reagan in 1984, there were some serious reservations a lot of people had about his mental competence, and he comes on stage in front of Walter Mondale, tells a couple jokes, seems smooth, won the election just by doing that. And
do you remember that old Saturday Night Live skit with Phil Hartman as Ronald Reagan?
Yes, I think I know.
Whenever he's in public, or they bring people to him, and like there's a Girl Scout selling cookies. Hello, little girl, could I buy some cookies from you? Then she leaves. All right, everybody, back to work. Oh, we're gonna. And so like the amiable dunce, the amiable dunce was an act,
exactly.
sort of thing. Because so you set this this persona that then you can run counter to, sort
It
of
does.
setting the bar low.
It does. It does sometimes seem like Trump is like that. That maybe this is all, you know.
And you want to believe it's intentional.
Yeah, you're certainly.
I'm not as confident as you that it is.
Oh, I'm not certain that it is. I'm simply suggesting the possibility. There, as I said, there. I go both ways. Sometimes I think he's just.
Look, I think there's two things going on again with that. Is part of it I do think is just unintentional. It is his personality that, like I say, we are governed by Donald Trump's id, and he takes things way too personally. Obviously, he has more than a little bit of a vulgar streak in him, and he has a difficulty keeping his mouth shut. When you think of if he could have just kept his mouth shut about Jim Comey. And we'll get to Russia in a little bit too, but I bet the Russia thing is a non-story by now. But he opened his big mouth about having tapes of Jim Comey, which may not be true. He may have lied about that. And the next thing you know, he's got a special prosecutor. And I'm not sure, however funny it may be in the abstract, calling Kim Jong-un Rocket Man, insulting the North Koreans. I'm not sure how wise that is. But also what it is, I think Trump has unique ability, and this I think is purposeful. Whether it's healthy for the Republic, I'm not sure. But he has the ability to get under the skin of his opponents. And I think he does this on purpose. And to cause them to overreact. And he sometimes makes his opponents look ridiculous. And then he seems more sane. Or I mean, he stakes out a position that is more reasonable, because sometimes I think Donald Trump could get up in the morning and tweet out what a lovely sunrise in the east in Washington, D.C. today, and get 1,500 words on the New York Times editorial page about how the sun actually rises in the west.
Yeah.
If he came out in favor of Santa Claus, suddenly they'd be, David Brooks would be writing 1,500 words about how Santa Claus is from the devil and it's white supremacy.
It's easy to make those jokes about Trump. If Trump personally cured every form of cancer tomorrow, the New York Times headline would be "Trump callously ignores victims of other diseases."
Yes.
It's easy to, and that's certainly true. He's driven them up the wall. USA Today is insane on an average day about Trump. And when you read in Slate magazine, Trump ruins bridge, because apparently Trump is a big word in bridge. When there's somebody clearly has gone off their rocker a little bit. And there's no question, I think, that he benefits from it, and from the sloppiness of his enemies. The book that came out about him recently, has all these accusations, but clearly a lot of them are false. A lot of it was just sloppy journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes Trump, that just feeds into the notion that there's all this fake news out there directed at Trump, which there is, and fake news produced by Trump. So, I mean, it's a big helping. But yeah, looking back over the year, and what probably should count is policy. He's done better, I think, than you would have expected in terms of policy production.
Well, that might be the good segue to talking about the State of the Union, which, as we're sitting here, was just last night. And I confess to not watching because I loathe the State of the Union with the fiery power of the sun, and haven't watched one in many, many years. But I read the transcripts, because I much prefer to read the transcript, because I object to the State of the Union TV extravaganza show, which is largely what it is. But it is news, and obviously it's important, so I read the transcript, which I've done today. And overall, it seems, the reaction is, I certainly have looked at a lot of the reaction to it as well, is, one of the networks, I think it was CBS, has a flash poll, for what it is worth, that have 75% of the people approving, liking Trump's speech, of those who watched it, of course.
CNN had a similar result, which forced them to come out and denounce their own poll.
Yeah. So, it may be the CNN one I'm thinking of. I'm pretty sure it was CBS.
I think there's CBS and CNN.
And of course, super majorities of Republicans, that's not surprising, but independents, a supermajority of independents were impressed by the speech. And it was an interesting, because Trump does these things every once in a while where you think, if he could just do that every day, right, at least we would have some kind of normalcy. Where what he gave largely, with a couple exceptions maybe we can get to, it was almost any Republican. I'll put it this way, it was a speech that, by and large, Mitch McConnell could have given. Probably not with the acting artistry, not with the charisma of Trump. But it's interesting that it was in some sense remarkable in storytelling, because he used so many actual examples throughout the speech. You had, there was a time when it was like, well, first there was nobody up in the balcony. Then it was like one person in the balcony. Now apparently he's got a whole cohort up there. For every little point of his speech, he had somebody up in the president's box that he could point to and tell their story. And it personalized things. And one of the remarkable things I've seen people commenting on is how little he talked about himself, which is a near miracle.
Yes.
For Donald Trump, he didn't talk about himself that much. Apparently he used the word we. I don't know, it was like 30 times he used the word we, not I. And I said that the policy-wise, I mean, people will like some of it, they will not like other parts of it. And even though some of his talk on immigration was a bit overheated, but I don't think it was outside the bounds of political rhetoric decorum.
No, but I think the most important thing on the immigration is he did a successful job of presenting what looked like a compromise, making what he wants look like a compromise. To give you an idea of how well he did, the New York Times had a piece denouncing it as a compromise. And the grounds for why it wasn't really a compromise is Republicans weren't hurt badly enough. Unless you cut your own arm off, it's not a compromise. Well, that's probably not the right standard. Yeah, we'll give you DACA. We'll give you. He's actually promising a lot more than most people thought the Republicans would be willing to promise, and maybe more than they will be willing to promise, which is legalization for children of dreamers.
And citizens, beyond legalization,
yeah,
citizenship. And beyond dreamers. It's not just the dreamers, it's 1.8 million people.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking
about... Which is dreamers plus.
Right. We're talking about a large cohort that would be given what we call amnesty and citizenship, which is, in return, you're going to give me the wall, you're going to give me an end to chain migration where everybody's third uncle gets to come. And you're going to give me, what's the other thing he wants? He wants to get rid of the visa lottery and make a more merit-based, more merit-based immigration. Yeah, and it's going to be challenging for the Democrats to present that as a one-sided deal.
Yeah.
They're getting something they really want. He's getting something he really wants. Whether the Democrats will go along with it's another question. And again, whether Republicans can all get behind legalization. There's a substantial portion of Americans who think, and not without reason, that the law is the law. Yep. And they're offended by the idea that people brought here illegally should get citizenship. Now, my own feeling is DACA is probably popular, probably the right thing to do, provided we get some kind of reasonable settlement on immigration. I'd like to see something more than a wall. I think more effective policing of hiring of immigrants might be a more effective, illegal immigrants might be a more effective thing. I'm in favor of immigration, but clearly we do need to control our borders. And what Trump is now in a position to do, I think, is to expose something, which is that a substantial portion of the Democratic Party is really in favor of open borders. They won't say it. But to say something like no person is illegal really does sort of suggest that anybody can come here that they want to. We really should just abolish the borders, let anybody walk across. And that's clearly not a position that's going to win the next election.
If in effect you never want to actually enforce the law, you don't really have a law.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No. So, but
well, it's interesting that we'll see how it plays out, because we only have a certain amount of time. Because when we had our extraordinarily brief government shutdown a couple weeks ago, it was sort of a punt on on DACA and on immigration, because the Democrats at that time had wedded the two together, getting a budget to get the government running, well, not really a budget, appropriations, to get the government running, keep the government running, and kind of latched immigration reform to that. It was one of their demands. Well, they didn't get that demand, but it seemed like the agreement was we will get settled by, it was early February, which again, this is the last day of January, so that's, it's coming up within a couple weeks. So I mean, our government is only funded for a week or two more.
Yeah, I'd say it's coming up next week, I think. Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see who blinks on this. And then it would be a remarkable thing after all the discussion of immigration over the last, say, 15 years, if it was Donald Trump who was able to broker the big deal, which as I understand is an art form. There's an art form to deal making.
I understand that.
And wouldn't it be interesting if he was the one who was able to broker a deal? But of course, it mostly depends on Democrats in the Senate, how far they're willing to, because they seem to have had their hats handed to them during the government shutdown. They politically and probably policy-wise chose poorly. And latching these two things together and closing the government down for something that is at best tangentially related to government funding. I don't know that they're willing to play that game of chicken again, or
I doubt
whether
it.
we'll kick the can down the road for another couple weeks.
It does seem like the way to win by shutting down the government is to be the one that doesn't do it.
Yes.
And the Republicans learned that to their dismay. That was never popular. And if the Democrats realize they don't have that leverage, they really can't use it, then yeah, that peril has passed. This thing we get into over the budget limit is one of those crazy ideas that somebody came up with to fix the budget. So Congress has to keep okaying the debt limit, and it leads us into these crises, and it's a no-win situation.
Yeah. Well, the State of the Union, which seems to be broadly popular, Trump's speech, is part of what I was thinking of when I talk about it. It seems like there's some momentum building in Trump's favor. We'll see, because we're always one tweet away, and he's forever. There's going to be some reporter. I actually think it was remarkable that you talk about that was it Michael Wolff, the book,
yeah,
whatever it is, the Something in Fury. They used that. They were making fun of Trump at the Grammy Awards in an act of almost, probably for him, supreme self-control, because Hillary Clinton was part of it. She was part of this mocking Trump using that now largely discredited book. But it's almost a miracle that he didn't, though he tweeted about Jay-Z, which yeah. I don't know, maybe wasn't wise either, but it's remarkable he didn't do it. But you never know when he's going to go after somebody and destroy that momentum. Well, there's the segue to one of the things that we wanted to talk about was probably the biggest thing hanging over the Trump administration, and probably which has caused them the most consternation, is the probe over I guess I'll call it the Russian matter.
Yes.
And of course, a year ago plus, even during the transition, and then early in the Trump administration, there was an accusation, I suppose, that we know. I don't think anybody disputes that the Russians made efforts to disrupt or throw some chaos into the 2016 election. But then the accusation is that somehow the Trump campaign team itself, at I suppose relatively high levels, maybe even Trump himself, were compromised and were were working as agents or tools of the Russian
that this was
Russian
a
government.
co-conspiracy. The word that's used, of course, is collusion between Trump and the Russians, and the reason that's the word used is because nobody knows what it means, and so you keep accusing him of it. I find this to be one of the biggest non-stories so far, the biggest non-story in recent political history, and it parallels the other one, and that's Trump firing Mueller. What's his first name? Robert?
Robert Mueller.
Mueller, you know, I have read, must be something like on the order of 38 stories about Trump firing Mueller. What the effect would be, would it destroy the presidency, would Republicans go along? It's an event that never happened and hasn't happened, and it might have come close once. But what does it mean when the press is writing story after story about an event that doesn't happen? Now, as far as the Russian thing, that's it was not only has it not happened, we don't know what it means to say that it happened. It's very unclear what the allegation is. What exactly do you think Trump did? Or one of his aides did, and there's, from the very beginning to now, there's never been any clear idea of what exactly that is.
I think there are multiple accusations, some of which, let's say the expiration date has gone by. Because in the beginning, it was there's a low-level foreign policy aide on the campaign, Carter Page, so low level he wasn't even paid, who apparently sometime in the summer of 2016 went to Russia. And the argument is that he was compromised, that somehow he became an agent of the Russian government. In fact, that was, as I understand it, because we haven't seen it, that is one of the accusations in the so-called Steele dossier that was started by a conservative website, the Free Beacon, then dropped and then picked up by the Clinton campaign was paying this guy, Christopher Steele, a British guy, kind of a private investigator, a former, what's the British version of the CIA, which I've suddenly lost?
Oh, MI5.
MI5 agent. And now he works as an independent contractor. He collects dirt on people. And he had this dossier that alleged all sorts of crazy things about Donald Trump and those around him. And part of it was Carter Page is a Soviet stooge.
Right.
Nobody believes that's true anymore. And then it became, the newest one is that this extremely low-level guy, the Papadopoulos, whatever his name is, some guy very tangentially related to the Trump campaign, was in a bar in London and said something about there's going to be a story about Hillary Clinton's email. And then the story came out a couple days later, some additional story about Clinton and her emails. Well, how could he have known that? Oh, because the Russians knew about it. He said something about the Russians are going to reveal something or something like that. And from this, the theory is that the Trump campaign was in collusion with the Russians, which had stolen her emails, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you do get, because this Papadopoulos guy has, if I even have that name right, by the way, has, I guess, pleaded guilty to some kind of obstruction of justice. You do have Mike Flynn, who was National Security Advisor, who pled guilty to, I don't know if it was a perjury or obstruction of justice. Yeah. He lied to the FBI about some stuff. Then Paul Manafort, who was campaign chair for about 6 weeks or so of the Trump campaign. He's under indictment for stuff that happened before he was involved with the Trump campaign, but it does involve Russians. There's, I don't know if you want to call that smoke, but there's a little bit of steam. I don't know what you would call that. Now, what it adds up to is a different question.
Yeah, I mean, I still point out that whatever Manafort may be guilty of or not, there's nothing there that gives us any clarity about what the Trump campaign or Trump himself might have been guilty of. This is, as you point out, something that happened before the campaign. Apparently, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I'm not sure it's out yet, but there's a story about Manafort in the Atlantic. And I did hear the author, the journalist, interviewed. And he was talking about this relationship between Manafort and this Ukrainian oligarch. And it sounded like a pretty seedy affair. And it does sound like at some point Manafort, this again well before the campaign, Manafort was trying to broker his Washington connections to this oligarch in return for a lot of money. Well, there you've got some idea what might be except that, as the author of the piece himself said, there's not a shred of evidence that the Russian oligarch ever took him up on this offer.
Yeah.
All these things seem to trail off into the desert and then evaporate. I'll believe in the Russian collusion when somebody, defines it for me.
Might I suggest that hiring Paul Manafort was unwise? So he was hired. The reason Paul Manafort was hired because he was known to be a convention specialist, and there was a time when the Trump people were concerned that there was going to be, which there was a minor one, a move to deny Trump the nomination at the convention.
Right.
And they want to make sure they had the delegates in order. And that it seems to have been Manafort's job, was to make sure that they had the convention delegates in order and that they had the rules written in such a way that there was no way to undermine Trump at the convention, which is why shortly after the convention, Manafort was fired.
Exactly, because he was never close to the top. He was never, at any rate. Trump may well be guilty of all kinds of things, but I've always been opposed to special counsels, regardless of the party of the president, because but you end up with these wild, ungovernable prosecutions and investigations, which end up nailing some people for things that they never would have been prosecuted or investigated about if it hadn't been for the hope that you could somehow pull in a really big guy.
Well, there is a trend in these things. You saw this to some extent in the Iran-Contra deal. You saw it very much so in the whole Valerie Plame deal, is people end up getting indicted, in some cases convicted, in investigations where there's no underlying crime.
Yeah, and that's we have a really, at any rate, the Russian thing. If Trump's advice, if Trump's legal team is worth their salt, they will not let the president testify. No. The president should not testify while he's a sitting president. Something like this. I think it was a terrible mistake for the President Clinton to be forced to testify about the Paula Jones thing while he was president. It's disruptive to the institution. We need a president focusing on his job. And for better or for worse.
Slight difference, because that was a civil affair as opposed to a criminal affair.
That's true, but I mean, he still shouldn't have been forced to. I think they should have had perhaps discovery.
Well, Supreme Court disagreed with you, I think 9-0.
Yeah.
So you're in the minority on that one.
The Supreme Court is wrong.
Yep. Your microphone has taken a dive.
My microphone just bailed out.
That'll create very interesting sounds. This is, I think, there are now two stories with the Russia story. One is the Russia story itself, right, which we've talked about. And I think it's fair to say, in fact, I think most members of, especially of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Democratic members would agree that so far there's no evidence of anything resembling collusion, compromise. There's not a lot of there. But then, as you state, as I think I said earlier, one of the dumber things that Donald Trump did as president was kind of putting the squeeze on James Comey when James Comey was FBI director. And I don't think Comey is not wholly innocent in this, because Comey appeared to have been, I don't know, not entirely forthright with the President of the United States. Comey appears to have been leaking information to the press, saying one thing to the President, another thing to media members. And I understand why Trump was upset, because it was in the air, Trump is under investigation, Trump is under investigation. While Comey is telling Trump, no, you're not under investigation. Trump's argument was, why don't you say that? Because I'm sick of these headlines that I'm under investigation when you know that I'm not. Eventually, Comey gets fired, and Trump had some indiscreet tweets about that, including suggesting that he had audio tapes of James Comey saying things, which I don't think Trump has. I don't think he ever had. So I think we call that a lie.
Gross verbological inexactitude.
Yes, there's right out of your devil's dictionary, huh?
Yes.
But that is what spurs the independent counsel, is the sense that there's too much political influence over the FBI. We need something separate from the FBI to investigate this, something separate from the Justice Department. So you get Robert Mueller former FBI director. I mean, like, before Comey, right? He was FBI director and well respected. But this is the problem of these things precisely, is you get these very politically charged investigations where there's a lot of attention and a lot of money, and there's a very strong incentive on the part of the prosecutor's office to get something.
Sure.
And so now the story is not the investigation, but the investigation of the investigation is now you've got Republicans, in many cases, I think, overreacting, talking about conspiracies within the FBI, conspiracies within the Justice Department in total. You have Ron Johnson from Wisconsin making ridiculous claims about secret societies from texts that were obviously jokes from FBI people. There is no secret society. Though for a fun 24 hours, the notion that there might be a secret society. It'd be nice if everybody, including the president, could just sort of, and this might be more than a boy can hope for, would just shut up. Let the special prosecutor do his job and be done with it.
It'd be far and away better for Trump just to let this whole thing, let him run.
So I'm pretty sure if he says nothing, the story will go away, because I don't think there's really anything to the story.
I think what you find with genuine stories is the longer it goes on, the more you find out. When the longer it goes on, the less you find out.
Yeah.
Then it's probably not really a story.
Yep.
And this does strike me as this, and I agree with you. I mean, I think there's some evidence, and it's not entirely wrong of the Republicans to celebrate it, of bias in the FBI against Trump in favor of Mrs. Clinton. And those are the kinds of things that you celebrate. Is there a conspiracy? I certainly don't see any evidence of that. But that's the temptation in politics, is to I mean, when Clinton became president, the stories that circulated out of Arkansas were just completely wild. Now, some of them turned out to be true. He was, in fact.
But he wasn't killing people at an airstrip because he was running drugs.
Exactly.
I think that one was false.
That one was probably false.
Yes.
You know, was he using Arkansas State Police to round up chicks? Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so there's some, but for the most part, the outlandish stories turned out not to be true, and it's always wise to let those things go. But we also have a situation right now, and it does seem to me to be fairly new, where ordinary exercises, the president, whatever the president fired Comey for, and I think most folks, including Democrats up to that point, would have agreed that Comey deserved to be fired for all kinds of reasons. The president has the power to fire him. Now, if you want to find the president guilty of a crime for doing so, you've got to have a really airtight case, and it's got to be a very strong case to even contemplate such a thing. And now we've got judges claiming, that he can't exercise ordinary powers of the presidency with regard to executive orders like DACA, because some judge is offended by something he said about immigration. I mean, we've got a real problem there. The president needs to be allowed to be president, even if he's Trump.
Well, we have one more thing, because you and I have a meeting to get to. Although
we're trying to avoid it.
We're trying to be late for it, but
there are really important things to discuss.
Yeah, but it's 2018. I almost said 2016. It's 2018, right? That's the year. And if it's an even-numbered year, that means an election. Gall darn it.
Darn.
And this is no exception. Come November, there'll be an election. I suppose nationally, and maybe at some point we can talk about our state elections, because we have a couple big elections coming up in our state. But nationally, it's a question of whether Republicans are going to control Congress at the end of this. Then what would happen if you have a divided government with, shall we say, a unique figure like Donald Trump as president? I don't know what your sense of it is. I would say probably a month ago, there was a lot of sweating by Republicans. And there's some evidence. I always tell my Congress students that you can get your first sense of what's happening is look at retirements. And in the House, there are a lot of Republicans retiring, including Republicans from marginal seats who are probably reading the tea leaves. One, for example, is Darrell Issa from California, who only won by a small handful of votes last time. and just isn't willing to go. And he'll probably lose this time around.
He wants to go out a winner.
Yeah, and he'll probably lose. There's a guy from New Jersey just a couple days ago said he was gonna retire, and that's a loss. It's a Republican from New Jersey. That seat's probably gonna go Democrat in the fall. So there are some Republicans who are kind of abandoning ship. On the other hand, there's a new generic ballot out today that, which means generically, are you going to vote for a Republican or vote for a Democrat for Congress? So there's no name attached to it. And it's got the Democrats up +2, which is actually good for Republicans because it's been worse than that about a month ago. And the other factor is that the Democrats have a lot more seats that they have to defend in the United States Senate, mostly because we're 6 years out from 2012, which of course President Obama had some coattails, good year for Democrats in the Senate. Well, all those people, like Heidi Heitkamp from up north here in North Dakota, Joe Donnelly in Indiana is another example. You have a good number of Democrats who are running in states that were big Trump states, and of the 10 most competitive Senate races, 8 of those are Democrats.
I believe it's been said that this is the map that the Democrats are facing in the United States Senate is the most brutal since we started keeping track of these things.
Yeah.
For those listening to us who might not be aware of the fact, 1/3 of the Senate stands for re-election every 2 years, roughly 1/3.
33, 33, 34.
Yeah. And
that adds up to 100.
Thank you
for
specifying my roughly.
Yes.
The result of that is that it can be unequally distributed in which party has the most seats at risk. And I think, and I think this because I found people out there who say it, that there's a good chance that the Republicans might even gain seats in the Senate, which would be very good for them. And because, that would mean they would still be in a position to make the judicial appointments that they want.
Yep.
And there's almost certainly going to be some retirements in the Supreme Court before Trump has to run for re-election. So that would be a big thing. We have to distinguish that from the House. The House could easily be a disaster for the Republicans. But you mentioned...
Though they've got more cushion in the House.
Yes, and you also mentioned the generic vote is interesting because Republicans almost always beat the generic vote. Mm-hmm. By 2 to 4 points, something like that.
Well, the problem that the Republicans have is that whatever you can say about Donald Trump, his approval ratings, he still struggles to get over 40% approval. And that's bad. And there have been times in the past year where it's been awful. As one of the themes, he's coming back a little bit. His approval ratings are coming back just a little bit. He's probably, I don't know what it is today, but I bet it's in the low 40s if you aggregate the polls. Mm-hmm. But that's still marginal. And what it means is likely Trump is a drag on Republicans. So there are 2 variables. One is, can Trump get his approval rating up in enough time for it to matter before the election? Or can Republican candidates separate themselves a little bit from Trump? Can they maybe localize the election? Another factor is, we do have, despite the fact the stock market took a bit of a dive yesterday, on the whole, things seem to be going, better economically. Certainly the stock market is largely gone gangbusters over the past year.
And the economy as a whole seems to be doing well. And for the first time since the beginning of George W. Bush, we've got a fairly good job market going. Wages are rising. This is, the economy matters a lot less in an off-year election than it does during a presidential election. And in the past, you would have said the economy's not going to make a great deal of difference. But given a really weak recovery over a long period of time, the economy really does seem to be taking off. And it does look like certainly Trump is encouraging the Republicans to run on the tax cut as the cause of this newfound prosperity.
Another thing we'll know, we're entering tax season, of course. Whether people will notice, which they should, because 85% of the people are going to notice. They have more money than they did.
A lot of people
are
literally going to get.
Indeed, I'll note that my pay stub for January 2018 had $100 less taken out than it did in December. Tax reform.
Yes.
That's $100 in my own pocket that I
yeah.
didn't have last year, because I'm assuming, though I don't know this, but I'm assuming because of I could probably look at it and do the math, but I'm assuming it's because of tax.
I'm guessing
tax
that a
adjustments.
lot of Americans really are going to see over the course of the next year, they're going to see a lot of money coming back. And the Democrats will try and play that, but all the rich are getting more. And that's true, but somebody gives me $1,000. That's $1,000 I got, regardless of what some rich guy got. And now, might that make a difference? It might make a difference if it makes people feel better about the Republican Party, if they decide that tax cut was a good idea. Generally speaking, off-year elections go badly for the party in the White House. That's one of the things that the Democrats were hoping on. Granted, Trump's approval ratings are low, but I think if these numbers on the speech hold up after a few more polls, something like that matters, because for the most part, when people react to a speech, they don't really react to the speech. A lot of times they didn't even watch it. Mm-hmm. They tell you what they're really thinking about the candidate. And if he's coming back a little bit, after all, his approval ratings were some of the worst I've ever seen when he got elected.
Yeah.
They were worse than, for the most part, worse than Hillary Clinton's.
Yep.
And so it's just hard to know.
Well, so
how
is
to
his
gain
vote
this.
total, by the way. I just think I should probably point that out.
Oh, that's true.
Geographically spread efficiently, though.
Yes,
Way to go,
geographically
Electoral
spread
College.
Yeah, well, that's the problem the Democrats face nationally, and this is in the House as well, is their votes are too concentrated in too many places, and there's not a whole lot that they can do about that, gerrymandering or no gerrymandering.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the economy plays, because it's certainly, I think, one of the things that was such an impetus behind the tax bill, which I remember passed, I don't know what day was that, right at the end of December. Up to that point, I think you'd have to say legislatively, 2017 was a bit of a dud, especially when you consider you have unified government, and the Republicans spent so much time on repeal of Obamacare and then failed. So that was a disaster. I mean, there are other things going on with executive orders, judges, regulation reform that Republicans could point to, but no one's running for Congress on the president did regulation reform, right? No one really cares about that. It's however important it might be, no one really cares. But taxes, everyone cares about taxes. And if you have something tangible that you can say, this number of people from South Dakota got tax cuts, on average it's this amount of money, I was for this, that person was against this. I don't have to work real hard to come up with arguments against the tax bill, but most of them are less sexy than I gave you more money.
Yeah.
Maldistribution or it's exploding the deficit, I think those are really valid arguments. I share them, but I don't know how convincing that is. It's not as fun of an argument as I change the law so you get to keep more of your own money. That's a much more attractive argument than I was fighting about government debt.
Whether the tax bill is good for the United States in the long run is an entirely different question. Whether it's good for the Republican Party in the short run. That's clearly what Donald Trump ran up the flagpole during his speech, his State of the Union speech. It was the tax reform and immigration. And I think probably the tax bill is having some effect right now and will continue to have some effect over the next year that will be beneficial to economic growth in the short run. I think that's probably true. It's also probably true that the bigger all the businesses now like Walmart that are giving out bonuses to their employees and raising their average hourly wage. These are all things that I think were coming anyway. The job market finally is starting to grow, and it's simply getting harder to hire the people you need.
Are you suggesting that people might take credit for something that they actually were not responsible for, but just happened to happen on their watch?
Shocking as it is to
I think
imagine.
that's going to happen.
If the economy continues to improve, Trump will take credit for it. And that, in fact, is one of the functions of the presidency, is to be bear the blame and be someone we can take it out on when the economy is doing bad or we're feeling bad about the things in general. And the Flip side of that is when things go well, he usually does pretty well.
I've often said the president is like the quarterback of the football team. Too much credit when the team's winning, too much blame when the team's losing. But that's what you signed up for when you became the quarterback. That's why they get paid the most too. Just ask Alex Smith. That was an NFL comment,
Yeah.
which is lost on him. He doesn't know who Alex Smith is. But maybe that's
Mr. and Mrs. Smith's son.
yes, correct. See, look at that. Also an expert in football. I will tell you what's going to happen in the elections with complete accuracy in about 10 months.
Okay.
But we'll have a show before then too. We will have shows. So you can always email us at spotlight@northern.edu. But no, we have I think a couple of ball bearings bouncing around in our heads about shows we want to do, and we'll get some guests in here and do some fun stuff. But that'll be on by the next episode of
This
Spotlight.
is like Dirty Jobs. Suggest something we can talk about. We'll come on and talk about it.
We can do it.
Here's something too.
Our lack of knowledge obviously doesn't stop us from talking about
I
things.
think we need some voter feedback on his beard. I really do. I think we need some folks to tell us whether you like that idea or not, because I'm of two minds about it. Left hemisphere, right hemisphere. So let's go with it. No,
There's
actually,
only one opinion that matters, and she's at my house right now. That's the only opinion that matters.
That would.
And so far it's pro, but
so
we'll
far,
see.
okay.
Anyhow, so email about the beard or other items. But until next time, then, this has been Spotlight at Northern.